The sudden rise of ISIS and its brutality in dealing with its enemies has sparked a heated debate about Islam and what it teaches. I want you to take a look at an argument that broke out on Bill Maher's HBO program between Maher, actor Ben Affleck, and author Sam Harris.
When you want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world, I would argue that liberals have failed us. The crucial point of confusion is that we have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous. It gets
so hold on, are you the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
But why are you so hostile about this? It's gross, it's racist.
It's not, but it's so nuts.
It's like saying the stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not listening to what we are saying.
You guys are saying, if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles, like freedom of speech, like, you know, we are endowed by our forefathers with inalienable rights, like all men are created equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad ideas.
But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
The motherlode of bad ideas. Sam Harris is with me tonight. He is the author of Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. Thank you. I'm sure you've seen that a lot. You created a firestorm there. So do you stand by your statements that Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas?
Yeah, you know, that's the kind of thing you say when a celebrity is shouting over you and not letting you talk. So it requires more discussion than that. And to be fair, that was a context in which it was very hard to have this discussion. But you know, I can defend that claim. I think that we have an idea here that all of our religions are the same, that they're all equally wise or equally empty or equally irrelevant. And this is obviously devout believers of various religions don't believe this, but secular liberals tend to believe this, and it's just not true. Our religions are quite different, and there are many cases in which, you know, Christianity is worse than Islam if you're going to talk about something like opposition to embryonic stem cell research, because Muslims believe that the soul enters the fetus at day 180 or 120, depending on which hadith you believe. So I would never dream of criticizing Islam on that point, but we have to acknowledge that Islam has doctrines like jihad and martyrdom and death to apostates, which are central to the faith in the way that they aren't in other faiths, and we have to grapple with that, and Muslims have to grapple with it.
And you are an atheist, and the point being for many people is that you can criticize Christianity, no one will call you anti-Christian or anti-American, but if you do the same when it comes to Islam, then you're Islamophobic. I want to get to an article that you wrote. It's called Sleepwalking Toward Armageddon. All right, I'm going to put some of these quotes, and I want you to respond to it. And sort of in the context of what you were talking about, what happened on Bill Maher, you said, no doubt many enlightened concerns will come flooding into the reader's mind at this point. I would not want to create the impression that most Muslims support ISIS, nor would I want to give any shelter or inspiration to the hatred of Muslims as people. In drawing a connection between the doctrine of Islam and jihadist violence, I am talking about the ideas and their consequences, not about the 1.5 billion nominal Muslims, many of whom do not take their religion very seriously. Why don't people hear that instead of what they hear about being racist or Islamophobic?
Yeah, well, we have a kind of dogma of political correctness here, which is stifling conversation. Many liberals want to grade Islam on a curve, you know, that we're not expecting the same kind of civility and openness to free speech and other liberties that we hold dear and are right to hold dear from Muslims throughout the world. And so when cartoonists draw the wrong cartoon and embassies start burning, we criticize the cartoonists, and we criticize the newspapers that printed the cartoons, and we practice self-censorship. There was an academic book at Yale University Press on the cartoon controversy that wouldn't publish the cartoons. This is just madness, and it's a double standard that if you actually want to look for racism and bigotry, this is the bigotry of low expectations. This is a kind of racism that, and this point doesn't originate with me. My friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali has made this point many times. And so what we need is the same standard of reasonableness and tolerance applied across the board.
Okay, I want to get to another couple if I can. You said, but there is now a large industry of obfuscation designed to protect Muslims from having to grapple with these truths. Humanities and social science departments are filled with scholars and pseudo-scholars deemed to be experts in terrorism, religion, Islamic jurisprudence, anthropology, political science, and other diverse fields who claim that where Muslim intolerance and violence are concerned, nothing is ever what it seems. And I think you believe that not admitting that there is a problem does more harm than good, mostly to Muslims.
Yeah, well, so what the president wants to say is that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. And I understand why he has to say that, because it would be too inflammatory given the concern that we are clashing with the Muslim world to speak honestly about this. But clearly ISIS has a lot to do with specific doctrines that are really Muslim doctrines, the Islamic doctrines. And it's not just the kind of Islam you get at a terrorist training camp in Afghanistan. It's the kind of Islam you get if you simply read the Quran and the Hadith. And so waging jihad against the infidel and killing apostates and taking sex slaves, even this is in the teachings, and it's not peripheral. It is central. And reformist Muslims need to speak honestly about this, and many of them do. People like Majid Nawaz and Irshad Manji. These are people who will not play hide the ball with the articles of faith. They will honestly talk about these problematic doctrines and honestly call other Muslims to figure out a way to contextualize them and put them on the shelf and retire them, frankly. And this is quite a challenge, because we have this idea of revelation that these books were dictated by the creator of the universe. In the case of Islam, it's the Quran. In the case of Christianity, it's the Bible. And then you are now hostage to the contents of these books, which can't be edited. But happily, the Bible is much easier to cherry pick, and this explains why we can forget about Leviticus and Deuteronomy and so many of the vile passages in there, and why Christians you don't hear any talk among Christians about stoning people for working on the Sabbath. It's easier to do that, but we have to encourage the same kind of reformation in the Muslim world.
And we have to go. And my colleague Fareed Zakaria wrote a very poignant article and he talked about some of the same things that you're talking about. Thank you very much. Let's bring in our panel now while we work on that. I want to bring in Sam Harris, the author of Islam and the Future of Tolerance, and also Dino Vidala, columnist for the Daily Beast. Thank you guys for jumping in a little bit early here. If we get Armstrong Williams back, we'll bring him in as well. So, Dean, Armstrong Williams, Dr. Carson's friend and business manager, doubling down on Dr. Carson's Muslim comments. What is your reaction to that?
I think on some level, Armstrong Williams just denounced Ben Carson's comments on some level by saying, of course you could have a Muslim candidate. What Ben Carson said, though, is part of the meme we've heard from the right over and over, that being Muslim somehow makes you less American and you have less rights. That somehow, since I'm a Muslim, I'm a threat to this country. I'm an enemy to this country. I want to oppose Islamic law and take over the country. These are things we hear over and over, and we're doing our best to fight against these ideas, to make it clear to our fellow Americans that I don't want to impose Islamic law. My Muslim friends don't want to impose Islamic law, yet somehow we keep hearing this over and over. And it's a fight. It's a fight. I'm trying to reach out to my fellow Americans and win the hearts and minds, and it's a struggle. Yeah.
So, Sam, do you view Dr. Carson's comments as bigoted at all?
Well, I do. I think we have to distinguish between how we treat ideas and how we treat people. And what you hear in Dr. Carson's remarks is a kind of Christian demagoguery coming into the conversation. Frankly, he's not a very thoughtful person. I mean, here's a surgeon who doesn't believe in evolution. I mean, if ever you needed proof that you could be a surgeon without being a scientist, you have it in the person of Dr. Carson. So I don't expect him to have thought deeply about how Islam may be, as a set of doctrines and ideas, may be incompatible with the Constitution or any other set of ideas. But he is a Bible thumper of sorts who, I think, rightly fears the demagoguery of his antithesis in the Muslim world. But that doesn't mean, so for instance, I am a very vocal critic of Islam as a set of doctrines and ideas. And Dean, your other guest, has called me a bigot in the past. I think quite unfairly.
On Twitter, not in your face. Well, I will tonight if you like that.
Well, okay, it's even more courageous to do it on Twitter. But let me just spell out, lest he seem to obfuscate the issue here, is that I think there are thousands, no doubt thousands of Muslim Americans who could be great presidents and far better presidents than Ben Carson or Donald Trump. That is not, and there's nothing about criticizing Islam as a set of ideas or worrying about Sharia law that denies that fact. And what's very unhelpful here is in all the other cases where people like Dean and other Muslim apologists find bigotry and racism or pretend to find it where it doesn't exist.
Before you respond, I want to ask Sam this. Sam, do you think that Islam is inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution? As someone who studies this.
Well, it depends what you mean by Islam. Islam is a vast set of commitments and ideas, and you know, there are 1.6 billion Muslims on earth who hold to those ideas in varying degrees. Some nominally, and some are, you know, right next door to, or even right of, you know, Mullah Omar. The crucial case of extremism now is ISIS, or the Islamic State. Now, if you're going to talk about Sharia law, if you're going to talk about the law that mandates the cutting off of hands of thieves or throwing gays from rooftops.
Is that in the Quran, Sam? Sam, is that in the Quran, throwing gays from the death? Sam, is that in the Quran?
It's in the Hadith.
It's not in the Quran. You know it's not in the Quran, Sam. And not all Muslims follow Hadith. You know that. I've had a gay imam, openly gay imam.
Dean, let him finish. Sam, finish your thought, and then Dean, you can respond.
Dean, you're going to get a chance to talk. But it's this kind of obscurantism that you hear piping up from Dean now, which gives some kernel of truth to the fears expressed by people like, again, genuine bigots like Ben Carson, or even worse, like the person who stood up at Trump's rally, who was obviously a lunatic, obviously a bigot, should have been shouted down by Trump. But what's very sinister here is when you have seemingly liberal Muslims play hide the ball with the article of faith and deny at every turn that there's any link between ideas and the kinds of violence we see in the Muslim world.
Go ahead, Dean.
Getting advice from Sam about Islam is like getting advice from Paula Dean about Black Lives Matters. You have to be kidding me.
There you go. He's calling me a bigot on national television.
I didn't call you a bigot. I have not.
I'm absolutely not a bigot.
Okay, and I will say this, Sam. I agree with you, and I applaud that you say that what Ben Carson says was bigotry, and what was said at the Trump event was bigotry, and that's great. And we do agree on that. So maybe we can find.
He said Muslims are a problem. Okay, that's what he said. Okay, are they a problem? You tell me. And I say, I don't see the people, and I use it often, that knocked down the World Trade Center going back to Sweden. Okay, so he said Muslims are a problem. That was part of what he said. Well, I mean, can you make the case that it's been tough? And by the way, most Muslims, I know many, are great people, just so you put it on the record.
So let's say, do you think Muslims are a problem?
Well, I think a certain segment are certainly a problem, and unless you want to be so politically correct where you want me to say, oh, absolutely not. I mean, you have ISIS, you have the migration, you have all of this stuff, you have, you know, a lot of people think you're going to end up with World War III over the Middle East. I've heard that for 25 years. There's something going on when you see beheadings. I mean, beheadings, we haven't seen that since medieval times, beheadings. You see dunkings, they call them dunkings, drownings, where they put people in a cage, dump them in the ocean. There's something going on. Yeah. So when he said Muslims are a problem, am I supposed to say, oh, look, again, you know, you probably won't put this part. I have great friendships with many people who are Muslim, living in this building, okay, living here. But I have great friendships. They're phenomenal people. And most of them are like that.
Have they asked you about your comments? What do you say to them?
By the way, they think we have a bigger problem than we do. Okay? They think we have a bigger problem because there's a radical Islamic group of people that is brutal. And unless our country gets tough and smart, and unless we have the right leadership done, we're in big trouble.